Welcome to Everyone Loves Guitar, where we sit down and talk with interesting professional guitar players, uncover their stories, and discover what makes them tick. If you love guitar, music, and the backstory of people's lives, stick around. You're in the right place. Hey, this is Craig. If you're a musician, I made a special 3-question survey for you at everyonelovesguitar.com/survey. Again, musicians only. Complete this 3-question survey at everyonelovesguitar.com/survey. Alrighty now, let's do this. Hey everybody, this is Craig Garber. Welcome to Everyone Loves Guitar. I've got a great player and a really cool guy, and Chris Cottros is with us today, and I want to thank Rich Eckhart for hooking us up. Chris grew up in Florence, South Carolina. He's been playing guitar since age 11. He was originally inspired to start playing by hearing the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and he began serious study of the guitar after hearing the master Jeff Beck, Larry Carlton, Alan Holdsworth, and Pat Metheny. He's a graduate of Guitar Institute of Technology in Hollywood, and he also holds a Bachelor of Music in Performance from Berklee College in Boston. He's an active player in the Nashville music scene. He's performed or recorded with people like Bryan Beller, Carolyn Dawn Johnson, Engelbert Humperdinck, Jim Brickman, Lee. Yeah, that's just every time I say his name, that's like I want to laugh, right? Isn't that, you know?
Yeah.
And that's not, isn't his real name like something like Paul Smith?
Dorsey, yeah, Alan George Dorsey or something. I mean,
like
that was the stage name.
Yeah, it's like a regular name.
Right.
I'm going to say that again. Engelbert Humperdinck, Jim Brickman, Ann Womack, Lila McCann, Lorrie Morgan, Percy Sledge, Randy Houser, Steve Holley, and the Floating Men. In addition, his playing can be heard on numerous TV and radio jingles, and he's been Terri Clark's lead touring guitar player for the last 10 years now. If you don't know Terri, she's a really good country artist, originally from Canada. She's released 10 studio LPs and won 3 Juno Awards and a CMA. Chris also played on her last 2 albums in the studio. Chris, thanks so much for your time, and I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. Thank you for asking.
Hey, you went to GIT and then you also got a college degree from Berklee. I was curious what motivated you to do that.
I have no idea. Yeah, I did it backwards. Like because when I first started thinking about Berklee, I was in high school, and but I wasn't really sure if I wanted to go to college per se. And for years before I even thought about Berklee, I had known about GIT from like reading Guitar Player magazine.
Sure.
And I had family in Southern California. So it wasn't really a weird stretch to move to LA. I mean, my parents weren't really all that excited about me living in Hollywood, but they were cool with it. And it was just a really... I don't know, for some reason that seemed like a better step to take right out of high school, move to LA, do that. And then it was probably because of what I got from that made me want to take it further and like get a degree or something. And I don't even know if it was so much about getting a degree as just hanging out with great players and, getting stomped on by the best of the best. Because, I mean, I was 18 years old in Hollywood hanging out with Joe DiOrio and Don Mock and Scott Henderson and these guys that were legends to me already. And they were really nice people first, and they turned out to just be scary, great guitar players, obviously. And I just wanted more of, GIT was just 1 year. Yeah. And I wanted more of that. So, by the early 90s, I was in Boston at Berklee, and people you've never even heard of could play circles around you with, it was like the best of the best from all over the world. The same thing at GIT, but definitely at Berklee, and it lasted longer. I was there longer.
Any guys that you went to school with at Berklee that are either well known today or that you bump into still?
Yeah, actually, there's quite a few people. I mean, like you mentioned in the list of people, Bryan Beller, he was at Berklee when I was there. I didn't know him all that well, but I was friends with he had 2 roommates that were also bass players that I was good friends with both of them. Wes Waymiller was one of them, and who's no longer with us, and great bass player. Anyway, Bryan has gone on to do great things. Obviously, Joe Satriani and Steve Vai and the Aristocrats, all that scene. Dave Rollins and Gilliam Welch are pretty huge in the Americana world, and I knew Dave Rollins. And I mean, not only has he gone on to be great, artist and songwriter and everything, but he's also a great producer. He was a next door neighbor of mine for a bit when I was living in Boston, and he was one of the first people that kind of planted the seeds in my head about moving down there to Nashville. So yeah.
Was there any Florence is what, middle-sized town?
Yeah, it was pretty small. I mean, it's grown a lot since I left, 30 some years ago, I guess. Yeah, small town. It was probably maybe 100,000 people at the time. I don't know.
So that's not that small. So was there any culture shock when you moved to Hollywood or up to Boston?
Moving to Los Angeles, yeah, I mean, it was a little bit, getting used to just being in a town that has traffic like LA.
Yeah.
I mean, I had already traveled a bit with my parents, and I'd been to big cities before. I'd been to Athens, Greece, and I'd been to places before moving to LA. And I had, like I said, I had family in Southern California who kind of talked to me about what it was like. But yeah, it was a bit of a change. I mean, but I was 18 years old, and I was moving in with a really good friend of mine who was also from my hometown, who's a great drummer, and his name is Matt Logg. I was moving in with him, best friends, so it was all good. I mean, I was up for it totally.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
How long after you finished at Berklee did you move to Nashville, and what were you doing at the time musically when you moved?
Well, I was kind of spinning in circles playing cover gigs before I moved to Nashville. I mean, after Berklee, let's say I graduated. I went straight through Berklee. I didn't take any semesters off, so I graduated in 7 semesters.
Oh wow!
Yeah, well, I already had, I knew a good bit of harmony and stuff from going to GIT and then being out of school, and I was teaching and playing a lot of music. And I mean, I already kind of had a little bit of, I started Berklee. I was, I think 22 years old or something, 20. Yeah. I'd already been out of school for a while, when I started Berklee.
So you were a little more mature and probably a little more focused.
Yeah, and I already had, I was able to test into this, I was able to not have to take certain classes.
Correct.
I already advanced credit or whatever they call it, advanced play credit. So, yeah, I did it in 7 semesters, and I tested out of as much stuff as I could just to save money, because I mean, even back then, early 90s, it was expensive. And I didn't, nowadays it's ridiculous. Well, not just Berklee, any college,
man. It's crazy.
Yeah. So, but, I just wanted to go straight through and save money, because you could go through the summer at Berklee and take full credit load, full course load. And, so that's what I did. And I was a performance major, which was just a clever excuse to play guitar all day long. I mean, for the most part, I originally had thought about film scoring or, something like that, but it was really out of my realm of, I loved playing guitar so much that it was kind of like, I don't know, it was just, I knew I wasn't going to be playing guitar a whole lot if I got into the film scoring thing, which is, it's an irony, because nowadays, some of the biggest film scoring people in LA are guitar players. But
yeah,
anyway.
Like I interviewed Lyle Workman.
Yeah, he's my friend Matt works with Lyle
a
lot.
He's
so yeah, it's
brilliant.
Totally.
That dude,
great guitar player.
Oh my God, he's an amazing guitar player.
Ridiculous guitar player. So yeah.
So once you moved to Nashville, how did you start getting work?
It was, you meet one person. Like when I moved to Nashville, I kind of felt like I knew that I was going to run into people that I had known in Boston, even though some years had passed. Because I graduated Berklee in '92. And a lot of people that I knew that had moved to Nashville immediately moved down to Nashville from Boston. Okay. So I moved here in like the early spring of '96. So there's been a couple of years had passed since I'd seen some of these folks. But I knew that eventually I'd end up meeting somebody, because in the, mid '90s, Nashville was still a pretty small town.
Yeah.
It's grown so much. It's changed drastically from what it was when I first moved here.
Were you in Boston for those 4 years, or did you move back to South Carolina?
I was there for a bit. No, I was there for a bit, and then for a brief moment, I went back to South Carolina and kind of gigged around just to save some money.
Sure.
To really move back to L.A. That was, I had thought about maybe going to New York, because I knew a bunch of people in Boston that had gone down to New York. But why trade one expensive cold place for for
an even more expensive cold place?
Yeah, and it's nothing against that. I love New York.
Sure.
At the time, I have an older brother who was living in New York City. So, I mean, it wouldn't have been that weird to move to New York, but it wasn't the sunshine. And I mean, if I'm going to live someplace and kind of starve, I would rather have nice weather.
I feel you on that, man.
But
that's why everybody's here in Florida.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you're going to starve, if you're going to be homeless, it's better to do it someplace where it never really gets that cold.
Yes, man. Yes, I feel that.
But yeah, I mean, I knew a few people, a handful of people in Nashville, and just literally, this is such a Nashville story. Like, this wouldn't happen today, probably, but I was living north of town. I think would be considered northeast, and in Hendersonville, which is kind of like a suburb of Nashville, even though it's its own place. Because at the time, I didn't know. I just happened to be driving, and I found an apartment, and it looked cool. Hey, I'll move here, Hendersonville. Great. Even though, it was a little bit of a way out.
Yeah.
Kind of. But I still had the big city mentality. Like, that wasn't that far out for me, I didn't think. But anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting when, I know what you're talking about. A lot of people are like, oh, he's not in Nashville. But when you're from a bigger city, it's like, no, it is. You just hop on the car for 20 mintes and you're there. Yeah.
Like, I didn't think driving for 20 minutes to get to, or 30 minutes to get to Brentwood, which is south of Nashville proper, It's still, I didn't think that was that big of a deal, 30 minutes in traffic, and, back in the 96, 97. Well, anyway, I had a teaching gig in Brentwood, which is south, and I'm living kind of northeast, whatever. And it was like a Monday afternoon, and I'm in traffic, and there was construction around the area where there's like now the Nissan football stadium, right. That kind of.
Oh my God, that's so crowded. Every time I'm there, it's like.
I'm stuck in traffic a little bit trying to get to Brentwood, and I see in my rearview mirror there's a guy in a red Toyota or something, a Honda, and he looks really familiar. And he gets out from behind me and gets to the side of me, and I look over at him, and it was a guy I knew at Berklee.
Oh man, that is weird.
A guitar player that I was friends with at Berklee, and I hadn't seen him in, probably 3 or 4 years, whatever. Because he split Boston immediately and moved down here, and we pulled off the freeway and exchanged phone numbers. And like a day or so later, we hooked up, and he took, we grabbed some dinner, and then we went to a couple of clubs, and he introduced me to these people that he knew because he had been here for a while. And it was the very first time I ever saw Kenny Vaughn play.
Oh my God. Yeah. I had him on the show. He's amazing, man.
And it was a gig where David Hungate, who, the great bass player, he was playing trombone. It was like kind of a swing big band, almost big band thing, not really big band. And, but yeah, Kenny Vaughn was, killing it. And Kenny still looks the same as he did,
Dude, that guy is like a rock star. He he was dressed like it was before he was going to start his show, and he was all macked out, man. On our interview,
he's always been. I mean, I don't know Kenny all that well, but he's always been a kind of a hero of mine. He's such a great guitar player and a super guy too. So but I just ran. You meet a person, and then through that person you meet someone else, and then hey, let's jam, or like that friend of mine, his name is Justin Thompson. He lives in New York City, I think now, but anyway, he had like a Django Reinhardt kind of gig that he was doing a good bit with some people, so he invited me to come do that with him, even though I didn't really know that bag all that well. I mean, I'd listened to Django and Eddie Lang and that kind of stuff, but I just sure, and then just you meet this person, and through that person you meet someone else, and then little by little you just end up. And in those days it was a lot easier. Nashville literally was still a small town, I think, compared to now. You've got a bunch of different circles of people, but back then it seemed like you had your songwriter circle, but it wasn't that hard to kind of get into that either. I don't know. It was just a lot easier. If you were a musician, it was a lot easier to hook up with people like 20 years ago or whatever in this town.
Well, it was smaller. I'm sure it was the fact that it was smaller, both in population and in proximity.
Oh yeah. And when I first moved to town, Lower Broadway, like you could pretty much park anywhere. Not that I went down there all that much, but you could park anywhere for free. And it wasn't, you didn't have people year round, in these like bars and stuff. It wasn't, it hadn't turned into like the tourist thing quite like it is now.
Right. Right.
It's always been kind of a touristy situation. Lower Broadway, where all those honky tonks and, and all that stuff is, but like, it's even more so now. It's like year round, and it's a destination place for like bachelorette parties and all stuff. It's definitely changed.
So that your network started growing and you started getting gigs. How did you get into the TV and radio jingle thing? And is there anything you did that people might recognize? And are you still doing that?
Oh yeah, I still do it.
That's a great. I mean, as a business guy, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. As a business guy, anybody who's not doing that, I don't understand. That is something that you should pursue. Anybody should pursue.
I got into it through my, it's all small town stuff. Like my old pal Matt Logg in Los Angeles knew this guy that one of the many random session accounts he had was working for this jingle writer that at the time lived in like Malibu. And he was in a band with him too, like this guy. So he decides to move here. This jingle writer decides to move to Nashville. He lives south of town in Franklin. And my buddy Matt gave him my number. And
wow,
because when he first moved to town, this was like 2005, I think. He knew some people here, but he was coming from LA doing jingles. And also he was producing stuff. His name is David Groh. He produced the Jim Brickman stuff, which is how I ended up playing on some Jim Brickman stuff, by the way. But he was looking for somebody that could play rock. And I don't mean like shredder, like Yngwie rock. Like there were guys in this town that could play rock, but they were kind of stuck in a different decade with it. They didn't really listen to the guys that had come along in the 90s. Like I kind of sensed even when I moved to town that there were guys that could play rock, but they were kind of playing 80s style rock still. Not to belittle what people were doing. It's just they were kind of 10 years behind the curve, I think, with their sense of what rock was supposed to be like, sure. I think. Like guitar solos weren't very popular in the 90s.
Yeah, right.
It was, and it wasn't really all that. It was a part more than a solo, And
that's even more so today to some extent.
So this guy was looking for somebody that was a little more savvy of what music had been doing for a while, like rock stuff. And, and also someone that could play, nylon string and steel string and whatever, get thrown whatever random stuff. And because we had this really good mutual friend in Los Angeles, we just sort of, I'll never forget the very first time I went over to this guy, to David's house. It was like a commercial for like Country Crock or something, which was a national jingle, right? And it was union. Everything was union. And it was also, oh, by the way, I'm producing this record for this piano player named Jim Brickman. Could you play some guitar on a few tracks? Sure. Okay.
Oh, so this led into
yeah, I'm doing other stuff for this same guy that's I'm doing jingles, and I'm also playing on records that he's doing, that he's producing for people. And it was just that random. It was just that literally the first day. And I showed up and I had all this gear with me, and his studio is in a bonus room in his house, right? And upstairs, and he didn't really have any place to isolate an amp or whatever at the time. And I had I had a lot of gear with me. And he's like, well, just plug into this pod, and man, it sounded great because this guy, he's a killer engineer. Like, he knows how to make anything sound. You could plug straight into an Avalon and it's going to sound great. You know what I mean? He'll make it sound with Pro Tools and plugins and junk. He can make it, the guy's a whiz at being an engineer and, producer and all of that. In addition to being a jingle writer and all that other stuff, he's very talented with all that gear stuff, so. And
so that relationship has continued to today.
Oh yeah. I was at his house a couple of days ago doing some stuff. Yeah. So yeah, we became friends too.
Very cool.
It's, it's business, but it's kind of the way it is, you become friends with people and that's how you end up working.
Yeah.
In this, you strike up friendships with people and hopefully the work keeps coming,
I will say this about musicians in general. I find that this is a very supportive community in general.
Oh yeah.
Musicians always support other people that support them, and they're very consistent and good about that. And
yeah.
I don't know if that's, I think that's a little bit unique to musicians, and maybe other creators are the same way. Maybe like I'm into photography, and I notice a lot of the photographers do that with each other. I think creative people in general are very supportive of one another, and there's a sense of, hey, we're all in this together. Let's a rising tide lifts all boats kind of thing.
I know, it's very true with comedians and a lot of actors. Hang out with actors, they're friends with each other a lot of times. And, yeah, it makes total sense. I mean, I saw a documentary recently on an airplane. It was a long flight coming from Canada or something. And, it was the Spielberg documentary. And, I guess I kind of knew that he was friends with George Lucas, obviously. I didn't realize that. Yeah, he was also there was that whole circle. It was Brian De Palma, George Lucas,
all the producers.
Yeah, all these guys that became the big directors. Coppola.
I was going to say Francis Ford Coppola,
Martin Scorsese. They were all hanging out together, showing each other the roughs of what they were working on at the time. It was because of Spielberg that I think it was Spielberg that suggested to George Lucas, do like a prologue on the Star Wars thing, because they all watched it and they're like, we don't get this, but Spielberg got it. And he was like, yeah, why don't you just give some background about what this is about?
Yeah, so they help each other.
Yeah, they help each other. They would critique each other's work, and it was constructive, and it was that kind of hang. So,
and I think the music, from my year and a half almost being involved with you guys, the music community is the same thing.
Yeah, totally.
Very much. And it's I think the guys, I'm fortunate I'm only dealing with what I consider is to be successful people that have been playing music for a long time. That's a successful person to me. And
yeah.
So all those all of those people in that category are like that. I would imagine the guys that don't make it, maybe not so much, but you got to wonder, which came first, the chicken and the egg? Did they not make it because of that? Not, that attitude, you know what I'm saying? Or yeah. So I think that's all related.
I heard someone say recently, I can't remember who it was this French singer, I think, said that, the attitudes in Europe about what defines, what's the definition of success is different for people in like France, which is their country, and than it is, say, in the United States. Here, you've got these, you've got the TV shows, and started with the American Idol thing, and now I don't even know how many shows that are like that
right.
spun off. But everybody, you're either a huge star on the level of Taylor Swift, or you're nobody. That's the way a lot of people think in at least here, in the West. But in Europe, they don't really think about it like that. If you're working, and I mean, I've talked to people in Europe about, their musicians about this too. Like, if you're working and you're doing your thing and you're fulfilled or whatever doing it, that's success. I mean, it's like, dude, it's kind of interesting. If you're a baker and you've got great clientele and people love to buy your bread, that's success.
That's success. Yeah.
Nobody really.
Right. But if you're a musician and you got people who want to listen to you, but you're not playing the garden.
Right.
You're not. Yeah, I know. It's a very warped. And I think part of the reason is, and I've learned this from talking to so many players, I know for a fact nobody realizes how hard this industry is, and nobody realizes the amount of dues that you continuously have to pay.
Oh yeah, it never really stops. I mean,
just being on a gig, man, and you're flying, or if you're lucky to fly, and you're fucking huffing it in a van or I mean, that's not. I wouldn't want to do that. That's really difficult.
I've seen really successful guitar players turn around and do gigs like that too. I mean, it's, and it's interesting, the whole flying thing. Sometimes that's rougher because you got to be at the airport early.
Yeah. And then traveling beats the shit out of you.
You get to the hotel at 2 a.m. and you got a 5 a.m. lobby call.
Right. Yeah.
And it's 3 hours to the airport in the middle, and it's like, because you're in Canada or something. Anyway, and so
in the winter,
to, a tour bus,
it's
but
tough, man.
Yeah, you never really stop paying your dues in that sense. So
I saw this thing the other day. I've again, come from the business end. I've read literally hundreds of books about success and mindset and accomplishing things, and I've always struggled with what's a definition of success. I saw something the other day. I don't know where I read it, but I did write it down, and it kind of resonated with me. It said that one of the definitions of success is not where you're at, but a measure of where you're at from where you started.
Oh yeah.
And something about that felt kind of good, because everybody has it. I think to apply success in a vacuum to everybody, just doesn't feel right. So you might have someone that's really successful, but he grew up or she came from deplorable conditions.
Oh yeah. And it's all kind of a personal thing. Like, what's success for the person? Like,
right.
Some putting out those, instrumental solo guitar records or whatever, that's success. Or for some people it's playing some huge stadium gigs or whatever. And that is success. I've had people ask me, like, do you get nervous before you play? And I'm like, I get more nervous playing in Nashville in a small club in front of friends of mine than I've gotten, playing on national TV or whatever. You know what I mean?
I totally get that. You're going to have 20 guys looking at your fingers. And
and I do this gig every so often here in town. It's like a Steely Dan cover band. It's called 12 Against Nature. And man, that's a lot more nerve wracking.
Who else is in that? That sounds like
the other guitar player is great. Session guitar player named Tom Hemby, who's been in Nashville for a good, long time. He's
I know who Tom is.
A bunch of records. I mean, Christian records as well as a bunch of country records. He's done a whole bunch of stuff, and he's a producer and all around, talented, guy, and great guitar player. He's the other guitar player on that gig. And,
that's a good gig, man. I'd like to check that out next time I'm in town.
You got to do some homework. I mean, we've been doing it for 15 years, and I still have to have charts for some of the stuff because it's not like a 12-bar blues or something.
No.
There's voicings that there's some chord changes if you haven't memorized it, like the guy John Harrington that plays with Steely, if you haven't memorized the tunes,
you can't wing that.
You can't wing it. No, I tried to wing it one time with some friends at a bar years ago, and it was like, it was horrible. It was not good.
Yeah.
It was like Bodhisattva or something. And I was like, I don't know the changes to this one.
Yeah, you can't wing Steely Dan, man. For sure.
You don't fake your way through that, So yeah.
Cool, man. Hey, I want to talk about some of the artists that you've played with. If you could tell me maybe how you got the gig and if there was an interesting or cool story about working with them. And let's start with Percy Sledge. What a great voice that guy had.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was so random. It was one of those things. It was years and years ago when I was in South Carolina. I was playing with this keyboard player, singer guy who worked a lot. I mean, this guy played 6-7 nights a week. And so I ended up playing with this guy. And so I ended up working 6 or 7 nights a week as a result, which nowadays I don't know many people that really can do that anymore. But it was one of those things kind of like the Chuck Berry thing where Percy would go to different towns to play a local gig, do a gig, and he would hire local guys. He didn't really have a band.
Did he get paid in cash like Chuck?
I think he did, he was a character, but, he also, from that one gig, he was like, hey man, I want you to be my guitar player. I'm like, well, we're going to have to figure out how to make that happen. And it didn't ever pan out to be, that much. I mean, it couldn't, it just, cause he was bouncing all over the world. I think his wife was managing him. And it was literally just the two of them would show up, and he loved his whiskey and he loved certain other, herbal substances, and,
doesn't make him a bad person.
nice guy. And I met him basically at the sound check at this club.
And he was up in age by that time, no?
Yeah, I mean, but this was...
You got to wonder, man, how's a guy that age
this
partying like that level?
Michael Bolton remake of When a Man Loves a Woman. I can't remember.
Right.
It's everything gets hazy once you've been doing this for a while, I think. But so we met at Soundcheck. That was like at the club, and, we're rehearsing through all these tunes that we're going to play later on in the evening. And it's all good. Everything's cool. So the gig comes around, and he's obviously been drinking some of the stuff that was provided on his rider in the dressing room and whatever else. And so we did like 20-minute versions of certain tunes. I mean,
when a man loves a woman for 20 minutes.
And he would sing a couple of verses, chorus, boom, and then want me to take a guitar solo. Okay.
In When a Man Loves a Woman.
Yeah, oh yeah, dude, totally. And then so we did that, but not only and then he would sing a bit more and then want me to take another guitar solo. And we did that because I remember we did A Whiter Shade of Pale, right? The old Procol Harum tune.
Great song, man. Yeah.
And it seemed like every other minute I was having to take solos. That was the longest version of that tune I've ever played, right? It was kind of funny, but at the same time it wasn't, because I knew what was going on. There was a big crowd there to see him, and I think a lot of people kind of realized, this guy may be a little bit three sheets to the wind, to put it mildly, because I don't know. I mean, he was super nice, and I really kind of felt bad, but whatever. I mean, it's just one of those things that I'd heard that Chuck Berry used to literally drive up to the club, and it was the same thing. Like, he would hire local guys and want to get paid in cash. Yeah. You know what I mean? I've heard the the way people used to do stuff, it's such a trip. I heard Aretha Franklin, you had to pay her cash before she'd even walk out on stage.
Really?
Yeah, she had it in her purse on stage. Like if she was on stage, it's because she had the money for the gig with her on stage.
That's really funny, man.
That comes from a whole different time when the business was, obviously different. So,
yeah. It's interesting. I've seen Buddy Guy, I don't know, 4 or 5 times, and he's hammered. He's definitely been hammered on a couple of those occasions, but that does not, I think he was, unless he's just out of his mind,
Well,
because
he's getting up there in age too,
Well, he's I've seen him as far back as like in the early 80s, but in the last 10 years, I've seen him 3 or 4 times, and he's really fucked up. He seems sometimes he's like, motherfucker, there's like a few different Buddy Guys.
Yeah. A guy that actually, our production manager with Terri Clark, I think he ran monitors for Buddy Guy once or twice. And he's told me Buddy can say some pretty crazy stuff on stage, man.
And I just, totally out. And I just assume, well, he's, 3 sheets in the wind, but, because I'm like, that's just, like drunk behavior, but it never impacted his guitar playing, which was amazing.
Yeah. It's strange. I don't see how the people I've never been, I could never really play effectively, on any kind of substances, all or whatever. If you want to watch me like tune for an hour, still play tunes and, get me on something, alcohol or weed or something. And it was just never my scene to get, a beer or two, maybe, I what I mean?
Get it, man. I'm the same. I'm not doing any of that shit when I have to, in remote business mode. I am not doing any of that stuff.
Work. Yeah.
Not for me either.
Even when I used to play in bars, and years ago when I played in bars, I remember one night I was playing with this drummer who was really good, but he had a drinking problem, and we're like doing the last set of the night or something. And luckily there wasn't a whole lot of people in this bar. But we're doing this slow blues kind of thing, and it was like the second tune of the last set, and somebody had gotten some booze to him somehow, and he passed out behind the drum set.
Oh my God!
Right here, the damn song, he just fell over, and
I'm sorry,
our gig was over. At that point. And for a long time after that, I wouldn't even drink a beer because it just tweaked me so much.
Yeah, I could see that.
Because, this business, man, you can, if you've been around as long as Buddy Guy, think about it. And he owns his own bar, I think, still in Chicago.
He does.
Legends, right?
Legends,
so, when you own your own bar and you're a guitar player, that could be dangerous.
Yeah. Well, and it's Nashville especially. I've talked to other guys that, when you're a session player and you're on a gig, man, management and the artist, you think they're your buddy, but they're your employer.
Oh, yeah. Totally.
And they're looking for that shit. If you're drinking on the job, even if you're drinking you're drinking on their job.
Oh, yeah. And honestly, it's disrespectful to the other people that are on stage with you or on. I haven't been on any sessions really where people got hammered I have been on sessions where, like, late in the day, if it's an all-day thing, maybe somebody will go to the store and get a 6-pack or whatever.
Sure.
Or maybe somebody may have smoked something. Who knows? Whatever. But I've heard stories about the late great Jeff Porcaro. It obviously never affected him to smoke a little weed and sit down and it'd be first take on something that we've all been blown away by. So. But when you're on a gig and you pull that kind of behavior, man, it's disrespectful to everyone. That's not just the artist, but it's disrespectful to the people that paid money to come see the band or whatever the artist. And it's just not. Plus, I don't know. I used to get ribbed by it when I was much. I started playing in bars before I was legally, able to buy booze. Even though back in those days, the waitresses and the bartenders would be like, "Hey, if you want something, that's no big deal." Things were a lot looser in the late '80s and early '90s, obviously.
Sure.
And but I still didn't, I'd get a Sprite or something. You know what I mean?
Right.
I could laugh. Oh, you want water? Sure. A cup of coffee. I just wasn't, I don't know. I realized back then if I was playing in bars 5-6 nights a week, which I was at certain points because you could do that back in the day. And if I drank every time I was in a bar, and I'm in a bar 5 or 6 nights a week, I'm going to have a real problem by the time I'm 25 years old.
Oh, real before that, man. Yeah, real quick.
I mean, and I see guys, I won't mention any names, but I've worked with some guys in recent years that play on Lower Broadway and some of those honky tonks, and they'll play for hours and hours and hours on end. And I think that could possibly be a problem with some of the guys that do those gigs down there, is that, they could, the alcohol's there, people buying you shots, and you take a break and you have a beer or 5 or whatever, what I mean? Like, and it, before you know it, if you do that a lot during the week, I mean, I don't know, this business there's always been, the pitfall of it, and not to mention the old saying about Nashville, it's a drinking town with a music problem, So,
I never heard that.
Yeah,
that's a drinking town with a music problem. That's interesting.
Yeah, people told me that years ago. It was, so.
Hey, talk about your gig with Terri. How'd you get that gig? And any cool stories?
I got that. The band leader at the time was this drummer named Chuck Fields, great drummer, and we had worked with another artist who was cool, just playing locally though. But Chuck was a friend, great drummer, and he was the band leader. And he called me up one day out of the blue and said, "Hey, what are you doing this year?" This was in 2009. So yeah, it's 10 years ago, like coming up pretty soon. And he's like, I was like, I don't know, what's up? And he's like, well, Terri needs a new guitar player. All right, cool. I'll do it. He's like, yeah, there won't be that many dates, maybe 30 dates or something. Ended up being a lot more than 30 dates, but, it was just really, and it wasn't really an audition. I went over to his house. He gave me a couple of tunes, and I showed up at his house, and it was me and him and the guy that was playing bass at the time. And we just jammed. And after like the first song, basically, he kind of got up from the drum set and like, yep, they wanted me to kind of audition a bunch of people. So I've got to sit here for the rest of the afternoon and like hear a few more people, but you got the gig, and,
but that's always like, that's not, I don't know about you, but that's a nice thing to hear, but when that's not comforting in a way. You got it, but I got to go through a bunch more people, huh?
I think management wanted him to listen to several people, but we always kind of know who's right for a situation.
Okay, and you were his buddy. You were guys. Yeah. Okay,
he had played gigs together, so he knew that it was something that I could do. So he was sort of honoring their wish to have listened to several people. And I heard that, some of them were good. I mean, the thing is, you get to a certain point where, we can all play. It's just a matter of, is the hang going to be good?
Yeah.
And that's the thing a lot of people don't think about with artist gigs. Like, you're on the gig. I heard a guy say this years ago, probably somebody in the Terri Clark camp. You're not just on the gig the 90 plus minutes or whatever, 2 hours you're on stage. You're on the gig the whole time. I mean, you're on the bus or in sports or in restaurants. You're in, you're with these people. Especially if you do a tour, like a month or 2 month tour or whatever, you're with them. You're living with these people.
Yeah.
And, you got to be able to hang with them. There's got to be a good chemistry on and off stage.
Totally.
So, it's just, and honest, man, Terri's the easiest artist I've ever, nothing against anybody I've ever worked with. I've learned something from every situation, even, when it's been something that I knew I probably wasn't the right guy for. And there've been a few of those over the years. You get on a gig you say yes to it, and then you do it for a bit, and you go, this is not really what I should be doing. And either you end up leaving on your own, or they sort of make it they make it known that they don't really want you on the gig.
Yeah,
know?
Sure.
For whatever reason. I mean, I got bounced out of something one time because I would close my eyes when I took the guitar solo on this one song. The guy thought I was falling asleep on his gig.
You got to be kidding me, man. That guy probably just didn't like you, because that doesn't make any sense.
I think he was just going through a really rough spot with life in general, and he was looking for stuff to be angry about.
Yeah. Because that doesn't make any sense at all. Because everybody, who opens their eyes and everybody gets into it. They close your eyes. You like,
I mean, it was
pouring your heart and soul out. Usually,
it was kind of hilarious, but at the same time, it was like, whatever. I mean,
yeah. Well, if that's why he wants to get rid of you, it's going to be something else,
dude. Yeah. I mean, my late father used to say something, and I will never forget it. He was like, there's people in this world that aren't happy unless they're mad at something.
Yeah, man, there are some people that are just in a perpetual state of fucking misery.
They're just not happy unless they're pissed.
Yeah. No, I know. And, man, I'm allergic to those people. I really hate being around people.
Yeah,
like that,
they're energy vampires.
Yeah, that's exactly right, man.
It's toxic, and if they're the artist, and you kind of have to kiss their ass, and it's like, oh, it's just not cool.
Need a shower.
And then now, and like for the last 10 years, the Terri Clark thing, she's so not like that. She's the coolest, easiest. I mean, she's the artist, she's the boss, it is what it is.
Sure.
And you've got to you got to pull your weight. But like for one thing, like after the first year I was with her, like when my first year with her, we had steel guitar and a fiddle player, and acoustic guitar. It was a bigger band. And then she decided, either for financial reasons, I think it was probably musical and finance. I think it was a combination. She wanted to be kind of a leaner rock and roll thing. Guitar, bass, drums, and kept an acoustic guitar, extra guitar player. So acoustic guitar, electric guitar, bass, drums, and then Terri plays acoustic. And I mean, Terri, and I'm not jiving. I mean, dude, she's studio tight on acoustic.
That's awesome.
Guitar. Like I can have her in my in-ears with no trouble. I mean, I haven't worked with many artists that can really play that tight live.
That's great.
A lot of times, some of the country artists, or anybody, not just country, the guitar is more of a prop. It's right. Got it there, but it's not really. They don't really play it, or if they like, it's not even plugged in.
Really.
I won't mention names, but it's not. You're not hearing it out front. You know what I mean? But with Terri, you're hearing it a lot out front. I mean, and I mean, it's just it's easy. I have that and a lot of drums in my ears, and that and me, because that's a whole other thing. Playing with in-ears is a whole other learning curve. But anyway, Terri's easy, man. So when she made the band smaller, I immediately had to change my approach, because there wasn't steel guitar and there wasn't all this other stuff to fill up the space. All these solos that were going to the steel and to the fiddle, I had to play. And also had to change my sound. I was using like a Tom Anderson Strat, I think I had at the time. And I had a G&L ASAT Telly kind of thing. And I'm not really a Telly guy, but anyway. So the second year out with her, I started using a Les Paul, and it was more of a rock thing, which was kind of my thing anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, that's always kind of been. I started out with like my first really good guitar with a Gibson Les Paul, so.
Man, let's talk about gear in 1 minute. I want to ask you just one or two more questions. This is going to be a good segue. Chris, what were some of the lower points or biggest obstacles that you've had to deal with over your career, and how did you get through them, either personal, music related, or business related?
I don't know that I've had I've had those moments. I remember like 2008. The year started out looking like I was going to be busy. And then I sat around a lot that year, like going, what the hell happened? Like I had sessions like and gigs the year before. And it seemed like the summer of 2008, I was sitting around going, is it over? Do people hate me? Like the phone just did not ring, and that may have been the only time I actually thought, but, I didn't really dwell on it, because I remembered my first year living in Nashville, things were not, I was kind of bummed out because I didn't know anybody yet, really. So you just have to just persevere, and you also have to think when you have really good years or good highlights, high points, I should say, that shit ain't going to last either. It's all temporary. Like it's, you get a chance to do some good gigs and play on some cool records or whatever, but that's all going to change. Like the guys that were really hot session dudes in the 90s aren't the guys that are the hot session guys now. Everything changes.
You know what, man? So let me ask you this. Your attitude about this is very, very like Zen and very cool. Yeah. Was this like you convincing yourself at the time, or are you just one of these people that, hey, I admire and respect the fact that you said, it's like the high points, that's not going to last forever either. So you just enjoy that. So like, are you just like that in general? You're sort of like, hey, I'm okay with whatever. Cause like, how did you know it's meant to, like, it's going to pass? Cause that's a hard thing when you're in it, when you're in something.
Right.
This guy told me one time, he said, he was a guy who'd gotten sober, and there's a lot of wisdom. I've never had an addiction problem, but I've been with a lot of people who have, and I'm very familiar with, 12-step program. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, a lot of that stuff. And he said something about, Craig, he was an old client of mine in the 90s when I was a financial planner. And he said something like, Craig, there's this dirty little 4-letter word that'll fix everything. Time.
Yeah, dude, totally.
But when you're in, and that helped me a lot, but I've had periods of down periods since then. And I'm like, yeah, I know in 6 months, this will be different, or a year or whatever that, I'm not in control of that 4-letter. I'm not in control of what the time, but fuck, man, that doesn't make it any easier.
No, it's
on
not easy.
Awareness that it's going to get better doesn't necessarily make that day go better.
You have to rough it. It's like before we started rolling, I guess, and I was telling you about the whole heart procedure, having that mitral valve fixed. That sucked. I was lucky because they were able to fix it laparoscopic. It was not, in the grand scheme of all the things that can go wrong in your life health-wise, that wasn't as big of a deal as what it sounded like before I knew what it was going to be like. But it still sucked. I couldn't drive
through it. It's probably scary. It was probably scary going through it.
Well, it was, yeah. Well, they gave me drugs, and that kind of helped. It just, the aftermath was really dark.
Right.
Also wintertime in Nashville. It was like, February 4th when I had the surgery, and I couldn't drive a car for 6 weeks. My first session was literally a month after I'd had that heart thing done, and I was fine, but I couldn't drive. So this buddy of mine, it was a session for him. He was the producer. He had to come pick me up, and I was playing acoustic guitar. It was like a triple session. It was all day.
Oh my God.
And so I was having panic attacks. It was a weird, anyway, but I knew that I was kind of hoping it would pass. And I tried not to dwell on whether it was going to pass or not. I knew that it was one more day and I was still alive and they had fixed me, and I felt pretty good, other than the fact that I was still kind of out of sorts from having this thing done. But yeah, dude, maybe it is a kind of a Zen thing, but the good stuff doesn't last, and neither does the bad stuff. I've heard Paul McCartney and all these different people say they never expected the Beatles to last as long as it did. And you think about it, the Beatles didn't really last all that long.
Not really, no.
But
check out their output.
That
has to be like the most insane.
Well, and think about like the early Beatles stuff compared to like, Abbey Road.
Yeah, right.
Like they changed music,
right.
And cheese, So yeah, I mean, nothing. You can't really. I mean, I'm not trying to be, Buddhist about it, but really, it's all about change. Life is a series of changes. I think about things. I think about the way I played 30 years ago. And sometimes I go, man, I was a better player 30 years ago, or I could do this, or I could, but you can't really dwell on that. You just have to kind of stay with what is now, because you could really drive yourself crazy sweating it, so.
You know what, man? I'm going to read something that kind of is in line with that. I read this story a long time ago, and after reading it, I got much more okay with shit. It's a little fable. It's a short little thing, and it's right. And if I'll edit it out if you think it's like silly.
No.
Okay, so here's it is. It says, a farmer had only one horse. One day his horse ran away.
Right.
All the neighbors came by saying, I'm so sorry. This is such bad news. You must be so upset. And the farmer just said, well, we'll see. A few days later, his horse came back with 20 wild horses following. The farmer and his son corralled all 21 horses, and all the neighbors came by saying, congratulations. This is such good news. You must be so happy because you got all these horses now. And the man said, well, we'll see. Now, one of the wild horses kicked the farmer's only son, and it broke both his legs. Same thing happened. All the neighbors came by saying, I'm so sorry. This is such bad news. You must be upset. And the farmer said, same thing. Well, we'll see. The country went to war. Every able-bodied young man was drafted to fight. The war was terrible, and almost all of them were killed, but the farmer's son was spared since his broken legs prevented him from being drafted.
Right.
All the neighbors came by saying, congratulations. This is such good news. You must be so happy. And the man just said, we'll see. So, man, when I read that, sometimes things, you come across things and like you're ready for that, to hear that. And that really helped me. And and now I when things happen, I just, we'll see. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Even if it's bad shit, I don't know. You can't connect the dots moving forward.
Yeah, and honestly, the biggest challenge, the longer you stay in this game, and this is probably not, it's not just with music. I know it's probably with anything, man, is staying in love with it and being inspired to get up and, like, dude, I remember going to clinics at GIT years ago, Jay Graydon and Tommy Tedesco and all these cats that, were real cats. I talk about being busy. I've never been busy like Jay Graydon was busy.
Yeah, I would imagine.
I played on over 500 sessions in 1 year.
Wow.
The math on that shit, right?
That's like insane.
Yeah. And we're talking about, he played on stuff that you're still hearing on the radio.
Oh, that's Steely Dan stuff.
40 years later, Larry Carlton, like him and Carl. Forget about it. Like, that was when people really made a living playing sessions. But anyway, the 90s was really the last for people here in Nashville too. But anyway, I remember those guys talking about like the burnout that happens as a result of the success. Like, you play on so many dates, you never want to pick up a guitar when you're at home. You need to get this pedal for this next session you're on. To hell with it. You don't change strings. You can get burned out when you get, really busy. Like I remember years ago, I was gigging a lot with these guys, and I was making good money, a lot better than having a straight, like day gig at the screw factory or whatever. I was happy, and I was also, I think I was probably teaching guitar a little bit during the daytime. So I was doing okay. And I remember at the time I had a girlfriend, and I was making all this money, but I was so busy, I never had a chance to actually take her out and spend any of it. It was just,
yeah, man.
It was just this weird sort of twist. Things are cool, but I don't really have a chance to enjoy. I don't have any time away from this playing thing. So it's balance. Joe DiOrio, great jazz guitar guru in Los Angeles, would say, hey man, you need to take one day a week and go to the beach, LA. And you need to have that one day that you don't pick up the guitar. You need to go and just live your life. Go to the beach, go do something.
There's a lot of wisdom in that, because I think the problem is, and I'm as guilty as this as anybody, when you don't separate who you are from what you do, when things are going great and what you do, then who you are is fine. But then when you have some wrinkles, which every entrepreneur, business owner is going to have, and guitar musicians are entrepreneur business owners, you got to have something else to go back on. The thing that saved my ass is my wife. We get along great, and I've been really lucky, man, for 26 years that I've always had her. We've always had fun together, and that's really and she's forced me to do stuff with the kids. Not that I don't want to do something with the kids, but I could easily work 24/7.
Right.
That's just because I like whatever I've done. I've always liked it,
Oh yeah, totally.
But I think
that is yes. If you're getting paid doing what you love, and it doesn't matter what it is, and this kind of gets back to what I was saying before about how we look at success in at least this part of the world. Success for a lot of people is being on TV or being on the radio and hearing your music played or whatever, touring, show business is success.
Right.
Man, that's not really success. If you're some farmer in Southeast Asia and you've got a good crop that year.
Yeah, you're successful.
Bro, that's successful. That's cool. He's happy.
Yeah. No, totally, man. I know. I know the standard of measurement, especially for people who have never achieved that standard of measurement, is to apply. It's kind of.
It truly is. And the longer you're in any game, the more you realize it's all just a battle or whatever. It's a challenge to yourself.
Yes.
It's not outside forces really truly determining what's going on. I've always sort of felt like, man, if I'm digging what I'm doing, something good will happen. And if I'm not inspired, which is probably why 2008, when I had that slow period, I also kind of remember not really listening to a lot of music at the time and not really being all that excited about going down to my basement and plugging in amps and making noise. I just wasn't really, I don't know. It was probably just that time to just slow down and not, I don't know, to suck, I guess, for a bit. I don't know. It's just a season, you go through stuff. So, Well,
let's talk about gear for a minute, because you mentioned before that you had a nice a Tom Anderson Strat, you had a G&L ASAT, and then you switch over to your Les Paul. What is your go-to guitar right now, and what other two guitars would round out your top three?
That's a tough one, because I have a tendency to not change guitars a lot. And with Terri, anyone who's ever seen her live could probably attest. We kind of don't take a lot of time in between songs. She doesn't talk excessively like some artists do. So there's a lot of back to back, no time to change guitars. Doesn't matter if you have a guitar tech or not. You just don't, there's no time. You're one song into the next, one song into the next. So I've also kind of gotten to the point, it's full circle. When I was playing in bars years ago, I'd show up with one guitar because that's probably all I had that worked at the time, or whatever. I'd show up with one guitar and play it the whole night, and didn't think about, I need to have this other sound for this tune or whatever, because I didn't think about like that. But man, in the last several months, this whole year out with Terri, I was using Strats again, Strat type guitar, because I don't really honestly own a Fender anymore. I had a Fender Strat, and I ended up giving it to a friend of mine because it just never really worked. I kept trying different pickups and all kinds of stuff, and for whatever reason, it's just not. it just doesn't. I thought it was cool in like the mid 90s when I first got it, but I never was able to make it work. So several years ago, this friend of mine who I do sessions for occasionally, he doesn't play guitar all that well, but he's a songwriter, and I just gave it to him, left it at the studio so you have something to fool around with. But I've John Sir, and this year I picked up a K-Line. I don't know if you're familiar with K-Line.
Where are they out of?
It's the guy Chris Kronline. He's in St. Louis. Builds great like Fender type, copy instruments, Telly, Strats kind of thing.
Cronline or
it's
Kron?
KR, yeah. It's K-line, K-Line Guitars.
Cool.
And Chris Kronline, yeah, he's nice cat, great, builder. I mean, there's a whole bunch of those boutique.
Oh, just tons of guys
out there. Bryan Beller was the one who kind of hooked me up with the Sir guitar thing. I had kind of I guess you could call it an endorsement deal with them.
Loads of people like Sirs, I've heard.
They're pretty fantastic. The K-Line is a little closer to a vintage Fender vibe. The radius is not as flat as it is on, say, the Sir. Although the Sir is killer, it's got the Mike Landau pickups in it, and it's great. The K-Line is great. So this year I kind of got back into the Strat thing because, you can play in like outdoor festival, hot summertime gig, and the guitar stays in tune. Like Fenders you can beat the hell out of Fender and Fender style guitars, and they're going to work.
They really do.
And I was just looking for a different sound because I had been playing Pauls and stuff a lot over the last 4 or 5 years, 6 years. And I don't know. Then recently, the last couple of months, I started playing Gibsons again. Not so much with Terry, but just in general, I started realizing I like all kinds of stuff. I like the Les Paul or SG thing, and I also like the Strat thing. I've never really been much of a Telly guy. I love what other people do with it.
Yeah.
And maybe it's just because, and I still have that GNL ASAT that I've had since the early 90s. It's a Leo Fender signature thing.
It's Telly?
Yeah, it's a Telly.
How do you
it's
like
cool
those guitars? I've talked to some people, and the people that play GNL, they won't kind of like play anything else. They're really,
yeah. It's I think it was the early 90s, and I was looking for a Telecaster, and I read in Guitar Player magazine that was a good one. It's called the ASAT Classic. So it was because they make another one that's called the ASAT that's got like soap bar type pickups in it, right? And those are cool, but that's not really a Telecaster vibe. I mean, that's closer to, it's like a P90 thing.
Yeah.
So this, I've had it since, I don't know, early 90s. And it's the only Telly that I actually own, Telly type guitar that I own. Those guitars have become Tellys in general have become very popular again in the Nashville circles, like a lot of these people that you see in bars or even out with the newer country artists that you see out on the road, a lot of guys are using Tellys again.
Yeah, most people. It's also like if you're a diehard country player, you're going to use a Telly. If you're a younger country player, you want to use it. They're going to use a Telly. It's kind of funny. Like I noticed patterns of Telly usage.
Well, it's and like it's a strange thing, but guitar use gear. What's popular now is kind of like, well, what's popular with clothing, or like I was pointing out to a friend of mine that nowadays people in their 20s, a lot of guys, they've got the haircut that's kind of short and kind of shaved, and they got the beard happening, and they got it's like they've got the uniform and they got tattoos, like the whole
dude. I don't get that either. I know we sound like old men, but I know.
It's like I mean, I'm nothing against any of it. But it's like a required. It's a required uniform, and I think in the last 10, 15 years, maybe because like Nels Cline, who plays with Wilco or whatever, people started getting into like Jazz Masters and Jaguars and stuff like that, and the offset thing. And it's like, when I was coming up playing, learning how to play guitar, it's so funny because an old friend of mine in Florence, South Carolina, he had like a 60s Jazz Master, that he never played because that wasn't really cool.
They've always been like alternative sort of band guitars.
Right.
Always, for the most part, or like solo angry artists,
right,
or something, or just like not necessarily angry, but they had like their own introspective like vibe that it was for a certain audience, and that's the guys who played those guitars usually.
I mean, it was strange, back in the 80s when I first started really playing guitar. Eddie Van Halen obviously was like the king of the hill,
right?
For a lot of people. And I mean, I loved Eddie too, but I got turned on to Jeff Beck. I knew about Eddie Van Halen because, I mean, who wouldn't in the 80s know who Eddie Van Halen was? Sure. I knew about Eddie Van Halen, but for some reason, I guess because maybe I had older people. I was reading Guitar Player magazine and I had older people around me say, hey, check out Hendrix and check out Jeff Beck and Eric Clapton and all that. So I kind of went through all of that before I got turned on to Eddie, or really actively listened to Van Halen records or whatever. But everybody started wanting to have a single pickup Strat with a Floyd Rose and stripe. And I just never really wanted one. I didn't want to, I never owned a guitar with a Floyd Rose. They're cool.
Yeah.
But I've never owned a guitar with a Floyd Rose. It's just not my scene, I don't know.
It's funny. We talked about Dave Amato before we started rolling. Dave's signature model guitar with Gibson,
right, is
a single humbucker with a Floyd,
right,
which is like unusual.
If I've thought about it. If I knew I wanted to do a whammy bar thing, and I was going to do it like out on the road and have it be consistent night after night, a Floyd Rose is pretty hard to beat.
Yeah.
It's going to stay tuned. I mean, and it's a certain sound, and I can kind of see that. The Alex Lifeson signature model, I don't know if they're still making it. Gibson, I don't know what's up with Gibson. I mean, they just got new ownership or whatever happening now, but they had a Neil Schon model for a minute with a Floyd Rose, and the Alex Lifeson guitar with a Floyd Rose. I mean, it's kind of cool. If you're going to do a whammy bar and you like a Les Paul, then that's a good way to go.
Totally.
When you're out there playing on stage, it's, it'll stay in tune. When you're playing at some amphitheater in Houston in the middle of the summer, it stay in tune better, so, I mean, I just never got into the whammy thing all that much anyway, So
right now your top three is a K-Line vintage, the K-Line Strat.
Yeah, it's cool.
The Source Strat, and then after that your Les Paul and your SGs. Yeah,
I've got a 57 reissue, one of those, I think they call it the R7.
Yeah.
Got it used, about 9 years ago here in town.
It's got a thick neck, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's got a baseball bat. I mean, but I love it. It's a light guitar. People pick it up and they're like, wow.
It's chambered?
No.
Oh,
it's like
really?
A 57 reissue gold top. And it's just, I mean, I remember years ago, I was out in LA hanging out with some friends, and I met this really great guitar player. This guy named Randy Mitchell, and he has a real 57 Les Paul. And I picked it up, and dude, it was light. It was lighter than like the Strat that I had or something at the time.
Wow, that's weird.
Yeah, it's just the old wood or something. It was, I think by the 1970s, people, the Les Pauls became kind of known for being really super heavy. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. But, the 1970s, everybody wanted like DiMarzio, super distortion humbuckers and brass nuts and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, like, I don't know. Once again, guitar trends, gear trends are kind of,
Right.
you know, it's kind of silly.
Yeah. And things come and go.
We look back at it now, like, you know, you think back to like the mid 80s to the early 90s. I mean, I had like some rack gear for a minute, you know, but by the time I got into it, I realized I don't really like this. I'd rather have a bunch of pedals and not even that many pedals, honestly. No, I think you're better off if you kind of limit it. I've gone through phases when I had huge pedal boards and then I'd plug it in and go. I'd spend more time screwing around with pedals than I would be actually practicing, you know.
Yeah, it's just not a good use of your time.
But yeah, it's fun. If I had to pare it down, well, a Les Paul. Honestly, the guitar that I use I show up to every time I record practically, or not so much live, but if I'm going to do a recording, a session or something, I've got a Guild Starfire 3 that I got, I don't know, early 2000s. And it was made in Rhode Island, so it's an older one, but it was brand new when I got it. And dude, that guitar is magical.
Somebody else, a session guy in Nashville, has one of those, and he told me about it. It was ages ago, so I can't think, but they spoke so highly of that guitar.
It's crazy how many things I've used that on. And I've even played like old school country sounding stuff through a Vibrolux with that thing, and it sounded great, you know, like, and I'm not even really like a country guitar player per se. I wouldn't put myself in the class of like, you know, Guthrie Trapp or Brent Mason or guys that really play country, you know.
And that looks like basically a Les Paul, hollow-bodied Les Paul.
Yeah, bigger than a Paul.
Yeah.
Thin line.
And it's got the jazz, more of a jazz body.
Right.
Yeah, angled little tip.
It's a thin line, sharp cutaway, whatever that's called. Is that Venetian cutaway? Whatever it's called. And it's the sharp cutaway, 2 humbuckers, which I think someone told me by the late 90s or whatever, Guild I think those pickups were actually made by Seymour Duncan, but I don't know for sure. They sound great. I've never had anything done to it. I had a volume pot replaced on it, but I've never even had a fret job done to it. Like it's that weird.
Man,
like
don't say that too loud, man.
Well, I know, but I'm almost nervous to have anybody mess with it at this point, because it still works. And it's just magical. And I mean, I can play rock stuff. I can play, I mean, if you're going to solo a lot and do like sustainy kind of distorted rock kind of crap, which I'm not like a chops guy, really, I don't think. And not in that sense. And that's not really the great guitar for that. But if you just want a magical sounding part, be it clean or dirty or whatever, it just somehow it just works for a lot of things that you would never think. So
very cool, man.
So yeah, Guild, one of the Strats, and a Les Paul, you know. Or I've been actually the last week or so I've been playing this SG that I picked up last year. Nothing fancy, or it's not vintage or anything. It's brand new. I got it last year. Bought it over the phone from Cat at Sweetwater up in Indiana. I was like, hey, pick me out one that's really cool, black, like Angus Young, right? And man, I love it. And I've done I had the pots changed to more of a vintage thing, but like other than that, it's completely stock. It plays in tune, it stays in tune, which is great.
Is it the 57s in there? Classic 57s? It's
classic 57s.
I love.
Sound great. Alnico too.
Dude, you know? This is what I'm playing. I play all my guitars, but.
Oh yeah, dude. There you go.
This is like a 2014 SG.
That's basically mine.
That year it was like a 61 reissue, which is great because I'm not a very big guy. My hands are average size, and it's got the 57s. This thing just is beautiful. The neck is perfect. It sounds wonderful. The pickups. Dude. You could play like Albert King blues on here. You could play screaming leads. I love this thing.
I love it. The thing about, I was always intrigued by the fact that Les Paul himself never really liked, he wanted Gibson to take his name off of that thing when they first introduced that model, because I think they were probably trying to compete with Fender, early 60s. And because, an SG really does sort of have it's got more higher end, or there's more of a, it's weird. It cuts through in a way that a Les Paul doesn't.
Yeah. Les Paul's more meaty, mid chunkier, beefier, maybe. I agree with you.
There's a complex thing about, and all Les Pauls can be different. They're really different. I mean, I guess all guitars are different, but an SG really kind of sits in a certain sonic space. I've actually used that a lot in places where I normally would have used the Les Paul. But, when I was like 14 or 15, my dad bought me an SG, which I wish I still had. And it was, mid 80s, early 80s, like an 82 or something, which was not a glorious period for Gibsons. But for some reason, this one was really good. The pickups were really good, and it played great. And like an idiot, I let it go. I sold it for something else, down the road. But man, there was I remember when I got that SG, I practiced a lot during that time, and my playing grew leaps and bounds, like in a short period of time. There was something about the way that guitar sounded and felt. And I had never owned one until last year. I decided, I'm going to buy an SG. Like,
good for you, man.
I bought it like as a birthday present to myself or whatever, and it's a great guitar. So it may get some road use next year, as well as Strats. I may, because it's kind of like the Mike Campbell thing. You just pick a guitar that works for the song. If I've got a chance to change guitars, I may try to do that more. We'll see,
Hey, you've mentioned your dad a couple of times. What kind of work did he do for a living?
He was in he grew up, son of immigrants, he grew up in the restaurant world.
Greek?
Yeah, Greek.
Yeah.
His mother was from Lebanon. His father was from Greece. And his father came over when he was like 16 years old from Greece. Didn't speak English all that well, but had some relatives. He ended up in South Carolina because he had a cousin in Florence, South Carolina, which that's what I was wondering. Small town in those days.
Yeah. Because there's certain pockets of like Greek immigrants that are really popular, like Astoria, Queens, Tarpon Springs down here.
Yeah, dude. It's an interesting thing. Nashville, it's an interesting. This is an observation. I've lived in, I grew up in Florence, South Carolina, lived in Los Angeles, lived in Boston. Boston obviously has a lot of Greeks.
Yeah.
A lot of Greek restaurants in Los Angeles, a lot of Greek restaurants in Boston. Nashville, there's a few, but they're not really, you don't really see people in the kitchen speaking Greek to each other. It's not. I think there are more Greek-owned restaurants in Florence, South Carolina than there are in Nashville, Tennessee.
That's interesting.
It's a strange thing. I mean, it's just a weird kind of observation. I think they tend to be more, other than like Chicago, there tends to be more huge Greek communities. I mean, obviously St. Louis probably has them, Atlanta, but I think a lot of Greeks tend to hang on the coasts more.
Yeah, yeah.
The East Coast, I know. Yeah, you talking about Tarpon Springs, dude. Yeah, going to Tarpon Springs.
Nothing but Greek restaurants down there, man.
Like you might as well be in Greece. In fact, the priest that was in Florence, South Carolina, for many years at the Greek church there, the Orthodox Church in Florence, he's in Tarpon Springs now.
That's funny, man. I'm not surprised. Yeah, and it's the same thing with the story up in Queens. It's all. I had so many Greek friends in high school, and literally they all came from Astoria, Queens.
Oh yeah. And that's also, you walk down the street and the shops, the Greek writing in the window.
Right.
I have an older brother. He lived in Astoria for a good while, just because, the rent was good in Queens,
hell yeah. Compared to the city Yeah,
dude. And, it's an interesting thing, but my dad was in like restaurant. He was in the restaurant thing, but he was also like the manager of this Shrine Club for a long time. And every Saturday night they had like dances, I guess, and they'd have live bands play.
Oh, so you got to play some of those?
Well, not so much. I was young. I was really young when all this was going down, but I would come out there and like sit at the side of the stage and watch these guys play. And that's kind of how I got turned on to some of it. I had a cousin who was much older than me, who's sadly passed away, several years back, way too soon. He was too young, but whatever. And he played guitar in one of these cover bands that was floating around in those days. And he had a wine red Les Paul that he plugged. I think he had maybe one like pedal, and he plugged into a Fender Vibrasonic Reverb, which I later found out was a steel guitar amp, I think. And it sounded killer, man. It was like the 70s Paul Deluxe wine red. I think he had an overdrive pedal.
Those are really popular back in the day, those wine red.
Oh,
Les
yeah.
Pauls,
so
man.
My first Les Paul, which I also wish I had never gotten rid of, was a wine red Les Paul.
Nice guitars.
Yeah, they were great, and so yeah, I got kind of turned on to playing guitar probably from the fact that my dad was in a situation where I could kind of see some of this stuff and meet some of these guys up close. There was a local cat playing in one of those bands that worked at one of the only music stores in town in those days. And he was, I thought a rock star, because he was older and he could play. He could play what I thought was really fast stuff, which it was actually compared to my beginner mind, So between because when you first start playing guitar, everything's difficult.
Yes.
You don't know. I remember hearing the guitar solo on the Eagles, I Can't Tell You Why thing, which is a great solo.
Yeah. It's a slow song, solo. Yeah. It's a pretty song.
Both of them are great solos, which maybe you know this. I heard that it wasn't Felder that played those. I heard it was actually Lynn Fry that did it in the studio.
I have no clue. I didn't hear about that.
I don't know.
Hip to that. Who did those solos?
But
I did watch the Eagles movie. It was great on Netflix.
Oh yeah,
the documentary was really cool. Yeah, it was really interesting. It was kind of sad to see how much acrimony was there, but
oh yeah. It's sad to see that ends up happening with these mega art. I mean, like the whole recent thing with Fleetwood Mac and the Lindsey Buckingham.
Oh my
split.
God, I know.
Like that's just and man, and don't get me wrong, because I love Neil Finn's vocal, and Mike Campbell's one of my favorite guitar players of all time.
Sure.
I totally, it's just a weird. I've seen Fleetwood Mac twice, and not because I think both times it was because somebody had a ticket and it just ended up happening.
That's your Peter. That's your Fleetwood Mac endorsement.
Well, I love them.
No, I'm just busting your balls, man.
I don't go to many concerts, whatever reason. Sometimes it's hard for me to sit through a concert. Like I'll sit there and I'm just like itching to leave because I want to get back home and play guitar. Or I don't know. I think when you do this for a living, it's not quite as magical to go hear other people. It depends, man. I mean, like if when I lived in Boston, I'd see Schofield or somebody or Pat Metheny. Oh my, whatever. But like, I saw Fleetwood Mac twice, and Lindsey Buckingham blew my mind both times.
Wow.
Like it just absolutely floored me. I mean, I always kind of knew he was great, and he's very unique because he doesn't use a pick and all of that, but like, and he's that voice that you hear on a lot of those iconic songs. So it's kind of weird to see that they are touring without him.
Just the acrimony is just a turnoff, man.
That's a drag to know that actually, but they went through a really rough patch, man, a long time ago. I mean, after the whole, by the 80s, by the late 86, 87, whatever it was, by that time he quit that time or whatever. I mean, I think it's just a drag that they're kind of coming to the end of their time of touring. This, I think, was supposed to be their last tour, right? And
well, then now he's getting lawyers involved and shit, and it's
yeah. I mean, it's just a drag that it came. It sucks that's and he's out doing a solo thing, which is cool. I don't know, it just sucks, because you would hope that after all these years and all of that success that they wouldn't have to go through that kind of crap. I mean,
who wants to at this age?
I heard great things about how, like, before John Lennon was murdered, him and Paul had patched things up. All the Beatles were cool with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Before George passed away, he was cool with, well, I don't think he was never uncool with Ringo. I think it was just, maybe there was rift between him and Paul McCartney. But, the Beatles broke up because, honestly, I think they were just too successful at a time.
Well, and they were so young, man. That all happened so quick. The coping skills that you need to process that you don't have at that age, man. To go from what they did to what maybe nobody else has gone through in music ever since, with rare exceptions.
I mean, that's the thing. You think, okay, success has happened, and there had never really been a group that successful. I mean, Elvis was huge, but he was by himself. They had each other, and that was cool. But like, they kind of grew up, and it was success that nobody had ever really experienced before them.
For sure.
It's crazy to I can't even fathom. So it's like, okay, success has happened. Now what?
Yeah.
Years ago I had this saying, back when there were people still getting record deals. I don't know. Anyway, I guess there's still record deals happening, but people would say, yeah, I'm getting, just signed a record deal. I'd be like, hey,
they're getting record deals, but not for the same reason they used to, I think.
Yeah, it's a different thing. It's a different game than what it used to be. But I've always sort of under my breath would go, oh, well, congratulations and, good luck. Because, dude, the troubles can start sometimes with, and I've been lucky in the sense that I've only observed it from a safe distance.
Yeah.
Success, if it's way too much success, like the Michael Jackson level success, can mess you up. Elvis Presley, it can mess you up. And a lot of times I've seen with people that didn't really have enough, they maybe had one hit, that could also mess you up.
Then again, you got like a situation. I interviewed, I think it was Rich Eckhart. And he was telling me about Leslie. He had a conversation with Leslie West, and Leslie turns around and says to him, talking about writing music, goes, hey, look, you only need one hit.
Yeah. Back in the day, that was.
Yeah. Mississippi Queen, he's done for life. Good. No problem.
Back in the day, people, as long as they had good publishing, worked out. Mm-hmm. Dude.
You just need one, Rich. That's what he said.
And I'm not like, making fun of this situation, but I would venture to guess that Keith Richards' bank account is drastically different than Ron Wood's.
Yes, absolutely.
Publishing, it is what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, Desert Island Discs.
Oh shit.
Knee-jerk reaction to top three, just for right now, man. Not like permanent. Top
I know,
three.
Because it could all change. Desert Island Discs. Now, I've had people ask me this before, and they were always conditions. Like you can't make it like a.
No, man, you could. This is like fantasy world on this show. You could have a box set. You could have whatever you want.
Honestly, if it was a Desert Island Disc, I would. Yeah, it would have to be some kind of box set, or at least like one of them that immediately comes to mind would probably be the Beatles 1967 to 70. That double album. It was a blue kind of cover that came out back in the 70s on Capitol Records. That was like the first Beatle thing I ever owned. And
that was like Columbia Record of the Month or something.
Right.
Like
or something.
Columbia House.
And like, so, cause for whatever reason, I love the early Beatles stuff, but I got turned on to the later Beatles stuff first. So whatever. That would have to be one. I would probably want to have like it's tough. I'd probably want to have like a Wes Montgomery thing in there too, like incredible jazz guitar, Wes Montgomery. That was an important record. It's tricky because maybe a Miles Davis thing or a Bill Evans thing or a Keith Jarrett thing or a John Coltrane Giant Steps. You know, I mean, if it had to be like one Pat Metheny record, it would probably be the first one I ever really listened to, which was American Garage. Even though he burns on a lot more other records, there's just that was the first one that I got turned on to when I was in high school or whatever. And you know, that's the thing. Like I've listened to so much stuff over the years. You know, I mean, in the short span of a few years, I saw Andre Segovia and Alan Holdsworth.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Like
that's pretty intense.
I was a junior, I think, in high school, and I saw Andre Segovia. It was a couple of years before he died. And then within 2 years, I'm seeing Holdsworth living in Los Angeles. I'm seeing Holdsworth and Scott Henderson and all of these cats. Frank Gambale was huge, you know, Larry Carlton. I mean, I just dig. Oh yeah, well yeah. In the same year that I saw Andre Segovia, I also saw Angus and Malcolm Young.
There you go.
I mean, you know, which I also had tremendous respect for those guys. You know, yeah. I've listened.
Tough call.
The desert island thing. You know, if I was really out on a desert island and I had a way to play albums or a CD or whatever. Mm-hmm. I would probably have a way to order some shit off of Amazon, I would imagine. Right?
Overthinking it. You're overthinking this, Chris.
Yeah, I know.
Overthinking
you know, I mean, one time somebody asked me that, and I was like, well, if I was on a desert island, I don't think I'd be listening to a whole lot of music. I'd be like trying to listen for tigers and shit to like, you know, pounce on me. I'd be too busy talking to Wilson, you know, like Tom Hanks,
Wilson,
you know, did. So
all right. So what's like the best decision you ever made, you think?
About what? The best decision I ever made, like musical decision, or
you choose, man. Just the best decision, a decision you made that you think was probably the best decision in your life.
It's hard because, you know, everything sort of feeds into the next thing. You know, you make a decision to do one thing, and then that leads you down a path that ends up giving you more decisions to have to make. And I think the best decision, I mean, just from a purely life and musical standpoint, because I kind of see them parallel, you know, the best decision I think for me as of late has been to maybe not say yes to everything that comes along. Because I know in the last 4 or 5 years, I think if I said yes to everything, I would probably burn out way quicker.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'd probably be a lot busier. Well, I know I'd be a lot busier. And especially, I don't know, I think more people would probably know me in this town. Like some of the newer people of Nashville would probably know me. But if I'd have said yes to everything, I probably wouldn't have been the right guy for the gig, for everything.
Right.
I don't know. I think sometimes when I was younger, I said yes to everything that came along. And that's cool because you learn that way.
Absolutely.
But when you get older and you kind of know who you are or comfortable with who you are, maybe, I think it's good to not say yes to everything that comes along because you might, like, I'm not the right guy for certain things, you know?
I think when you're younger, you don't imagine that, wow, I'm only going to get so many opportunities. And when you're older, you realize, no, I'm going to get a lot of opportunities.
You know, and I would rather, I don't like to spread myself too thin because I want to make sure every time I play, if I screw up, it's just because I screw up. It's not because I'm spreading myself too thin and I don't have time to pay attention to what it is that I'm supposed to be doing musically. And I mean, I think that goes along with anything in life. You know, you got to prioritize.
I totally get it. Are you a rule breaker or a rule follower?
I don't know. I don't know. I think I do a little bit of both. I think you kind of have to do a little bit of, I mean, without getting, you know.
Without getting specific on what rules you've broken.
Yeah. And also I'm not trying to be vague about the question, but
sure, yeah.
You know, it's hard to say. I think you have to do your own trip regardless of what it is that makes sense to you. And if that means you're kind of breaking a rule, whatever, you know.
I agree with you.
I generally drive the speed limit or maybe 5 miles over tops, you know. So, I mean, you know, it's
so you're a little bit of a rule breaker and a little bit of a rule follower.
Yeah, you know, it's but I don't even get me started on driving in Nashville. That's a whole other
dude,
game.
that's horrible, man.
It's like the worst drivers from all over the country or whatever are sentenced to Nashville after they screw up royally everywhere else. They get sent here, and there's been like thousands of them that have shown up in the last 5 years. So
yeah,
it's terrible, man. It's traffic. It's not LA, you know, obviously, because but there's a lot of things that make LA better to drive in. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of a jerky thing to say, but I think Californians drive better, but whatever. So,
happiest moment or time in your life?
Wow. There's been a lot, man. I mean,
that is so cool to hear that.
There's been so many. I can't really say that there's been one time, and I try to think that maybe there's going to be some more. I'm kind of looking for, that's the other thing is like, I don't really look at the past so much. I try not to, spend a whole lot of time looking at the past going, oh, that was such a great thing. I mean, I can think of specific times that were really cool. You know, maybe I was playing with certain people and it was really cool or, whatever. Or other things in my life were going really well, personal stuff. But, I think there's been a lot, and I hopefully there'll be a lot more, Well,
I hope so. I'm sure they will. That was I was really happy to hear that.
Yeah.
Most important thing your dad taught you?
Oh, geez. I've thought about that a lot since he passed earlier this year.
I didn't realize it was so recent. Sorry, man.
It was back in April. 86 years. It was a good run. That was a solid life. I really truly believe that one of the biggest things was to do what you love to do. Because he didn't really get a chance to do exactly what he wanted to do. When he graduated, the minute he graduated high school, the Korean War broke out, and instead of waiting around to get drafted, into the Army and infantry and all of that, he took his chances and enlisted with the Navy.
Wow.
Of course, because, at the time it was post-World War II, right? And if you were in the Navy, you possibly would get sent to Europe or someplace because of the Marshall Plan or whatever. Well, that didn't really happen either. He ended up going, to the invasion of North Korea.
Oh, wow.
Operating landing craft, I mean, it was a pretty dangerous gig, definitely. But it kind of got in the way of what he wanted to do. He wanted to go to college and maybe even go to medical school. But then by the time the war was over and the Navy thing was over, his parents were in bad health and he had to be the breadwinner. He had to take,
wow.
I mean, he had siblings, obviously, but he had to take care of business. Most of the older siblings were married, and he had his youngest sister was still a minor when both of it, because when
he came out of the war, when he came out of the service.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
when
wow.
he came out of the Navy, he had he had a younger sister that still needed somebody, and both of his parents passed within 6 months of each other.
Wow.
His father passed away on like Christmas Day of, I want to say 1955. Yeah. And his mother passed the following May,
Wow. That's terrible, man.
Yeah. It was a pretty traumatic thing to think about. Like, I can't even fathom how that must have been. And he had responsibilities. So I believe that's the reason why he was always behind me for the most part. I mean, I can't really think of a time where he tried to talk me out of doing this music thing. As crazy of an idea as it, you grow up in Florence, South Carolina, or anywhere, and you think, oh yeah, I want to be a guitar player for a living. I remember going, being in a high school guidance counselor's office in high school, and asking me what I wanted to do with my life. And I said, I'm going to be a professional musician. And they just did not know how to like comprehend that concept. Like it was the most foreign. In fact, I believe the guidance counselor said, well, you can't really do that. And I thought to myself, well, yeah.
What a horrible thing to say to a kid.
There are people that, there was a lot of horrible people. When I was in school, I encountered a lot of negative people, in the, teachers and administrative staff. I couldn't wait to get out of high school. I mean, my senior year was cool or whatever, but like for the most part, I hated high school and I loved like everything after, like GIT and Berklee, and it was a completely different scene. Going to college is way different than high school. But and it should be because you're paying it for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It should be a better thing. But yeah, I mean, it was a pretty foreign thing to do this, to say, oh yeah. But man, I knew by the time I was literally like 7th, 8th grade, I was going to do this. I just knew it. It wasn't even, I don't even think I decided to do it. I think it happened. And once it happened, once I got a guitar, that was the end of it, man. I was going to do it. So,
that is the one thing that successful guitar players have in common. I would say almost 100% of them, they had parental support. Even if there was like a fucked up family or problems or drugs or alcoholism on the parents' end, they had support. I think I've only interviewed maybe 1 or 2 people that didn't. So obviously that is a huge determinant as to whether or not you're going to be a successful musician, I would have to conclude.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know anyone. It's a weird thing because if you can choose to do anything else, I heard this quote years ago. Somebody was quoting the great jazz bass player Steve Swallow. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's played with a lot of great cats. He was an upright bassist who switched to electric bass back in the 60s, man. And plays with a pick. I mean, that's cool. Totally, but he sounds like an upright guy still. Like it's just the craziest thing. And he's played with a lot of. He's played with John Scofield a bunch over the years. But anyway, he had this thing where he would say, if you want to be a musician, don't do it. Because if you can do anything else, be a doctor, lawyer, whatever the hell, do that, because being a musician is a hard life. It can be a very hard life, right? But if you have to be a musician, if you just can't do anything, if you can't do anything else, it's the greatest job in the world.
Right.
And I've often thought that I really don't know that there's anything else I can do. I mean, maybe, but I don't know. It just nothing ever resonated with me. So there it is.
That's cool, man. Do what you love to do. It's your dad. How about your mom? Most important thing she taught you?
Oh man. To maybe overlook people's imperfections. People are going to disappoint the hell out of you at times. And life is full of that kind of scene, right?
Absolutely.
You got to forgive people for being human a lot of times. And I think I probably thought about that. I think I probably realized that more after she passed away about 8 years ago, like 2011. And I think I probably realized it more after she split, that that's probably one of the biggest things that I got from her was you got to have to forgive people of their stupidity or whatever. And even if it's not stupidity, just imperfections. You got to look past a lot of that crap. She tried to find the good in a lot of people. You know what I mean?
That's a very maternal thing. My wife is like that. That's a very maternal thing, I think.
Yeah, man.
My wife often says, I'll bitch about someone she's hanging out. She goes, Craig, if I went by your standards, I'd have no friends.
It's funny, dude.
Yeah, you're right. So I said, keep doing what you're doing. Do you have any non-musical superpowers?
Superpowers. I mean, I like to cook. I can do some things in the kitchen that are pretty groovy. I wouldn't brag too much. I mean, I'm not going to like open up a restaurant and get a Michelin star or anything.
Hey man, Nashville needs a Greek restaurant. We already had that conversation.
A lot. You know what they need is like a series of 24-hour diners like you see in New Jersey and New York area.
Yeah.
By Greeks that are from Greece, with the coffee cup, with the design, the Grecian design.
Yeah, they don't have diners there.
They don't have not like you see on the East Coast. You probably have them more in Tampa than you have here. You probably have more Greek-owned places in the Tampa area.
Yeah, we have a few. It's like the Acropolis. It's
Yeah.
We had Tarpon Springs, like I said, but that's close by.
Yeah, right. There's like 2 restaurants in Nashville. One's called Athens Family Restaurant. And then there's a new place over in East Nashville that I think is actually really owned by Greeks, but I haven't been there yet.
Man, do you know Mike Brignadello?
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, I don't really know him all that well, but obviously I know who he is. He's,
He took me to this restaurant. I think it's a Greek restaurant. It was in a mall. It was like delicious. It was, I think it was Greek owned. Maybe it wasn't a Greek restaurant. It was like really healthy salads. And I know I had a Greek salad, but God, it was delicious, man.
I mean, you got a lot of like hero places in this town, but they're owned by people that aren't necessarily Greek. They're people from Middle Lebanon,
East or something. Yeah.
Middle East. Yeah. There's a hero place around the corner. That's really great. I'm mostly a vegetarian, but it's really good. But it's owned by some guys from that are Kurdish. It's really good though. It just.
I'm telling you, man. I think Greek restaurant could be your plan B, dude.
Yeah.
Any hobbies or interests outside of music besides cooking?
Music has taken up so much. It's so weird.
Because it's your hobby and your vocation. It's tough.
Yeah. And years ago, like when I lived in Boston, especially, I would go shoot pool with, a couple of friends about every other couple of days or so, I got to be pretty good at it years ago, but like, I don't really have time. I mean, I have time, but I don't really know anyone who gets into doing that. Like, and it's just,
you gotta be careful mentioning that on here. Someone's going to come to your gig and say, "Hey man, I shoot pool."
Try to hustle me out of some coin. Yeah.
Or no. Yeah. Hey man, I'm trying to learn how to play pool. And then and it's like some hustler, man.
I don't have chops with that. I used to be a lot better than I am now. I mean, I can still play a little bit, but I don't have the chops,
That's kind of like the guitar, man. If you got to do that on a regular basis, you can't stop that, man.
Yeah, and just like music, if you play with someone who's not really all that good, you're not going to be all that good either. But if you play with someone who's better than you, you're going to get good,
That's very true.
Yeah.
Tough question. Toughest decision you've ever had to make or most difficult thing you've ever had to do?
I don't know, the toughest decision. Like kind of like going back to the thing about, the best moments in my life. There's been so many tough decisions,
Absolutely.
Staying in Nashville. I mean, there's been several times in the course of the 23 years almost that I've lived here that I've been very tempted to just say, all right, I'm done. I'm moving to Los Angeles. I'm going back to California. I don't care if I starve. I've got to be in the sunshine and playing with a different kind of music scene. But it's kind of like I said, I may have said this earlier. I don't know. I can't remember. There's an incredible eclectic group of people in this town.
Yeah.
So, you know, and not just musicians. If I split Nashville, even people that are friends of mine that are not musicians, I would miss out on that. You know, if I hadn't have stuck around this town, I would have probably missed out on some pretty important stuff, musical and non-musical. And so, but that was a tough decision to stay several times. There was a period of time around 2004 or so that I thought, yeah. And this was, I had bought this house, but I was like, you know, I could rent it out and just go back to California. And I don't know. I wrestled with it. And, you know, lo and behold, nowadays, I know people from LA that have moved here. An old friend of mine in the last, 6 months, has moved from LA to here, and with his wife and kid, and it's a strange thing. Seems like a lot of people leaving New York and LA and moving here.
Yeah, and one thing I will say about Nashville in general, the people there are very nice. Just just genuinely nice. Like even you go to a store and they say, y'all come back and see us. They're like, since they're genuine about it,
Sure. Yeah. For the most part, it's not, they're not,
it's not like Miami or New York. I can tell you that.
Right.
Much.
Yeah. That was a weird shock, living in Boston, and then moving back to the South. I mean, cause I've told people this story for years, coming from South Carolina, after I'd been living in Boston, I'd be in Boston for 6 months or so before I would head south to visit family and friends. And I would be in the Charlotte airport, because that was always like where the layover flight would be, the connection flight. And that would be the first time I'd hear a Southern accent in like 6 months or something.
Yeah, you've lost like almost all your accent.
Well, I don't know that I ever even had one. I can't remember. I mean, if I did, then I guess I did lose it, but I don't know. I don't know that I actually ever really had a Southern. I don't know. I probably did. I mean, I'd have to hear a recording of me from those, but I don't know that any exist. So,
2 questions left, man. Anything you regret not doing?
That kind of ties back into that one about the California thing. No, I can't really dwell too much on that kind of stuff. I mean, there's some stuff I regret doing. There's not a whole lot of stuff that I regret not doing, not musical stuff, not even life stuff, because, if I'd have done one thing, maybe something cool would have happened. I mean, it's no one can ever know. Maybe things just worked out the way they work out, I think, no regrets, man.
Dude, I got to tell you, you're like incredibly positive, man. You're a very optimistic guy.
I try to be, cause the alternative is not all that, I've had darkness, man. I mean, I've had periods of darkness. I mean, the whole health thing almost 5 years ago was kind of a dark period. The aftermath. Although when I was in the hospital, dude, I was Mr. Positivity the whole time. With everybody, I was just like bound and determined that I was going to get, rebound from that whole scene. And I did, knock on whatever.
Yeah, man.
And, I try to be. It's and I mean, I don't take drugs to make me feel that way. I feel
it's okay, man. I don't judge.
I try to. I don't do any drugs, man. You got any? No. No. I try to be, because if I sit around and feel sorry for myself or be dark, it's just not.
That's generally nothing good comes of that, man.
No, I got stuff to do, and if I just go, there's a lot of there's apprehension a lot of times. A lot of times I'll say, oh yeah, I'll do your gig, and then I'll sweat it for no reason. Like I'll have 2 weeks or something to prepare for a gig, and I'll just like obsess about making sure that I don't suck. And that creates some weird stress, but nah, no regrets, man. No regrets.
I had an interview the other day, and someone said, before I asked them what their superpower was, somewhere in the middle of the call, they said, they had a gig. He goes, but lucky for me, my superpower is I always over prepare. And I was like, that's a good superpower, man.
I remember somebody, maybe it was Steve Morse or somebody said something one time at a clinic or whatever about, you want to be that guy that shows up to the gig early and is like overly prepared, like it's, your integrity is on the line every time you walk out your door practically. And, word travels fast. If I can regret, if I do have any regrets, it's maybe that I took some gigs and sounded like total cack on them, when I probably should have passed on them.
Yeah.
I remember doing like something that was kind of a country thing one time, and it was horrible. The rehearsal went really well, but when the gig came around, I just couldn't hear it at all. It's not in my DNA to chicken pick or whatever the hell it was. And I'm just not an impressive music store guitar player. And that I don't have a bag of licks that I can like fall back on when times get tough in the heat of the battle. It's a real trip, but that would be the only regrets I have is I've said yes to some things that maybe I should have said no to, but whatever.
But you wouldn't get to the point where you also said the thing that you're doing now that you're happy is you're saying no to gigs, and you wouldn't have got to that point unless you'd said yes to too many. Right. It's a chicken or the egg,
I think we tend to obsess a little bit in this weird game about how are we in relation to other people? And I mean, not just musicians.
Everybody.
Everybody. And, we always play the comparison game with, how do we rate, against so-and-so and so-and-so. And that's just a never ending battle, man. And you just can't fall into that because, dude, like if I really obsessed about my guitar playing in relation to other people just in Nashville, forget about Los Angeles or New York or the world.
Yeah.
Just Nashville alone, there's some scary world-class people in this town, man.
Yeah. Incredible.
So.
And man, last question, biggest change in your personality, Chris, over the last 10 years, and how much of this change has been deliberate and intentional, and how much is just a natural part of aging?
Wow. I don't know. I don't know that I could answer that question. That would be better for somebody that's observed me from a distance. I don't know, because I don't know that I've really changed all that much personality wise. Maybe I've gotten a little mellower, if anything. I think as we get older, I don't know. I've probably mellowed a little bit about some stuff. I don't get bent out of shape about stuff that I probably got bent out of shape with, 5 years ago. My perspective on a lot has changed just in since 2010 or whatever. I see things a lot differently
from
now.
When you had your heart stuff.
Well, back in early 2014. That really sort of came out of the blue. Because I've always, and I try to exercise every day somewhat. I don't go to the gym necessarily, but I have like an exercise bike and I'll lift weights or whatever. And I eat healthy. Luckily, I was never really into the whole fast food thing, even when I was younger. And by the time I was in my 30s, it was definitely not something that I did a lot. So yeah. I've always been kind of into eating healthy, and exercising, especially in the last 15 years or so. But, so for something like that to happen, it was just kind of bizarre. How many people in the world have something like that? The cord to your valve snaps. What the hell? I didn't know that was something that would happen.
Yeah.
Let alone it was. But you know what's so weird? This is the crazy. I think about this a lot, dude. It just so happened that one of the leading surgeons in the world, not just in America or Tennessee or whatever, in the freaking world, one of the pioneers at developing the technique to fix that, happened to be at Vanderbilt Hospital, and he hadn't retired. He's retired now.
Wow.
That guy is a freaking rock star,
Wow.
So,
that's great.
So, I just, I don't know. It's a strange thing. Like maybe if I hadn't moved to Nashville, I don't know. I mean,
you can't, there's a million hypotheticals. No, you can't. I mean, and then it's more likely something like that is especially the way you've looked after yourself. Sounds like it was just genetic, and there's nothing.
You know what?
Thank God you were in Nashville because you had that guy.
Right. Yeah, and that's the way he explained it to me. It was what do you call it? Not genetic, but my vocabulary's falling apart, Craig.
It's late.
Because now I'm also trying to remember the dude's name, and I forget people's names nowadays. Do you find that happening to you, where you just like space on somebody's name?
It's not. Sometimes I got a pretty good memory. I never forget a face. That's for sure. I generally remember the name. I'm not once in a blue moon, and when it happens, I'm like, oh my God. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, I'm like, oh my God.
I remember.
I'm getting dementia.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh, you just didn't remember. I'm getting dementia. Like I go home and like, babe, listen to what happened today. And she's looking at me and she's like, okay, can I go back to work now?
It's a weird thing to space. I just remembered his name. Dr. Petrasic was his name.
There you go, man.
Michael Petrasic. Great surgeon. Anyway.
Shout out to Michael Petrasic for saving your ass.
Michael, yeah. Anyway, yeah. Crazy. I have it written down somewhere, I'm sure, obviously. No, he's retired now, but great surgeon. And the guy, his nurse told me that he had done over 25,000 procedures or something. I mean, that's the dude you want working on you. I had a whole, I've played a lot of gigs, but man, 25,000 heart procedure. I mean,
well, just hey, but this is what's amazing. I'm sure they weren't all for that, but how many of them were for that? And maybe it's not as unlikely. Yeah. Maybe it's happening. It's like, sometimes you're not aware of something like, often people will have hear a story like, somebody had a miscarriage and they'll say, I couldn't believe how many people now that, I've talked to people, so many people have them. Yeah. So, that might are you going to be hanging out with Dave Rowe before a gig talking about mitral valve cord snappings, right? Unless this happened to you, it could be one of those things too. Maybe it is more common.
It's a strange thing, Craig, because actually, now that I think about it, I had an uncle, my dad's youngest sister, her late husband. He had heart problems. He passed years ago in the early 90s, mid 90s. But he actually had mitral valve regurgitation or whatever. He actually had to have it replaced. And his heart was damaged when he had rheumatic fever when he was like a baby or something. Right. So it damaged his heart. Congenital, that was the word I was trying to think of earlier. But yeah, the Dr.
What does that mean? What's the difference between congenital and genetic?
Well, I think genetic means it's passed on. There's some sort of
a DNA thing, whereas congenital means is a conditional thing.
Yeah, it's something. Okay. I think what it is that there was probably a weakness there with that mitral cord that I was born with, and after X number of years, it popped, and so to fix it, basically they used a plastic or whatever implant that replaced that cord, and it's stronger. My oldest friend on the planet, him and his wife stayed with me for 2 weeks after the surgery. I've known this cat since first grade. And
that's really cool.
Also happens to be one of the great bass players I've known. His name is Sean Delson. He doesn't live in Nashville. He lives down in Lake Hartwell, Georgia. And he looked it up online and saw like there was like footage of the procedure and everything that I think he was able to find out what it was that they did to me. And I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to know.
Oh, you're a smart man.
I was like, I don't want to really obsess about this too much. Like, it was after the fact. I was like, well, as long as they fixed me, that's all that matters, And, because, it kind of goes with life. You don't really want to get too deep into the details sometimes. You're better off just letting it be, what it is. And that could be with music, too. You could use that analogy. Like sometimes if you get a little too analytical, you blow it, If you just kind of go with, I think as a musician, too, I think my best playing comes often when I'm not thinking too much about like what scale fits over the chord changes, and I just kind of go for it. I mean, it's tricky because sometimes you can sound like a fool, but you got to take that risk.
Yeah.
But so,
man, I remember that's a smart thing because this is before the internet. I started looking in some medical books when I had my vasectomy. I was in the doctor's office on the cold metal gurney, and I said, oh, let me go through some books on his desk to see what he's going to do to me. That was the worst. No, that was a really, really bad idea because it was a really bad idea because I was like, I'm leaving now and I'm just getting ready to walk out. And the guy walks in. I'm like, yeah, it was.
I mean, it's a weird thing. When I was a little kid, I was in grade school. I had surgery on my eyes. I barely remember. It wasn't that big of a deal. It was just there was one eye something needed to be done with the muscle or something. And it was something that apparently that wasn't that hard to do at the time. Nowadays it'd probably be like a laser thing.
Right.
I don't know. But back then, I had to go in the hospital for a couple of days, surgery, and it was in the summertime, so I didn't have to go to school, obviously, but other than that, I hadn't had a whole lot of stuff. I've never broken anything, thankfully.
Goodness, that's great.
I mean, I've been pretty healthy. I mean, I've heard the joke about, after 50, all bets are off or whatever,
I don't
know. It depends. I mean,
I don't think but I think if you've taken care of yourself, I think your chances are better than the guy who hasn't.
Right. Except for like Keith Richards, which still baffles me. But
yeah, right. Yeah. But there are some guys like that. I've met older guys like that have just completely, hardcore alcoholics, and they're just like, and they smoke cigarettes, and it's like, wow, man, I don't know how you're alive, and they just keep going. I mean, those guys are like genetic freaks. They just use their superpowers for the wrong reasons.
I think, with Keith Richards, I've thought about this because obviously that's like a kind of a marvel for everybody. Is that how can that guy still smoke and drink? And I mean, he's chilled out a lot from what he used to do, obviously, but he still does, does his thing.
You see him in interviews. He's always smoking, man.
He's always got a cigarette.
It's one after the other.
Yeah. It's DNA. And also, man, I think every day that guy wakes up, and for most of his life now, every day he wakes up and he's Keith Richards and his band is the Stones, and he doesn't really have financial concerns. So that takes a lot of the worrying of, I can't imagine him worrying about like the gas bill.
No, or like the price of lettuce or whatever, or his mortgage or anything.
Or I'm sure he hasn't worried about a mortgage.
Oh, in probably 50 years.
Ever. Yeah. He probably went from being a renter that was practically destitute with the rest of those guys to being over the top wealthy, like pretty quick, I've heard stories that, a lot of guys like him or Paul McCartney or whatever, like, they don't really even know how much stuff costs anymore because they don't really go do all the shopping. They have people that kind of, I know Keith doesn't really drive a car, anymore. I think they, for insurance reasons, make sure he has like a chauffeur to everything. But,
hey man, we should all have that problem.
That would not,
that would not be the worst thing in the world, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's weird because, now that the traffic and the parking in Nashville can be kind of interesting. oftentimes if I'm going downtown, which isn't that much, and I hardly ever go to like the lower Broadway to that honk. Like if I'm playing the Opry and it's at the Ryman, that's about the only time I go to that part of town.
Right.
But oftentimes if I'm going to hear someone play at a club and the parking is kind of sketch, which it's gotten that way, I'll just take Lyft or Uber or whatever, because
those things are great.
From my house to a lot of places downtown Nashville, it's about the same there and back as what I'm gonna. I mean, it's a little bit more, but there and back is not that much more than what parking is costing in a lot of places downtown now. So, which is absurd. When I first moved here, you could park anywhere for free practically, and if you did have to pay, maybe it'd be $5.
Yeah,
it was nothing. Now, I hear of people. Special events, there'll be like these paid lots where you pay $60 downtown.
Wow.
I mean, that's like Manhattan,
Yeah. Well, except Manhattan, it's $60 an hour.
Oh, I know. But
yeah.
You know what?
Yeah, it's
like,
crazy. It's ridiculous.
Crazy how it's gotten that way. And but yeah. So.
Well, dude, I can't thank you enough. Let me tell people is there any clips of you playing online?
Probably. Yeah, there's probably some stuff on YouTube with the Steely Dan thing, I'm sure there is. This is, to be honest with you, I don't really search out what my presence is online. I don't really. You
really are Captain Zen, man. That's.
I don't think about it, man. Like I'll check out other people on YouTube. Friends and people that I don't know, great players, but I don't really think about it. I've never really gotten into listening to the stuff that I do. Like once I've played on a record I haven't played on a lot of huge records, but I tend to get a little critical of stuff that I've done. And, if I hear something, a lot of times I'll go, I should have done this or I should have done that, and so I just generally don't spend a lot of time checking out what I've done before. I'm always kind of hoping that the next one is going to be better or whatever. And, cause I'm sure there's some stuff out there on YouTube of me where I'm totally like sucking, I'm playing like so many clams you could make chowder, or whatever.
I'm sure there's not, but I want people to check you out. It's Chris Cottros, Cottros.
Yeah.
Come see him out with Terri Clark. Few gigs. First of all, Chris also teaches Skype lessons, but he's only really interested in working with intermediate and above students. So if you're at that level and you are interested in, solving a specific problem or maybe getting an objective, other set of ears on your playing and you want to, help cross, or you got some goals you want to reach, maybe reach out to Chris. What's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Do I want anyone to get a hold of me?
Yeah. Are you on Instagram or something like that?
I am on Instagram.
All right. Well, let's do it. What's your Instagram address?
I think it's the CC Voicings thing.
Great. So it's Chris Cottros on Instagram. CC Voicings is what it should be.
VOICI. And dude, that came from a long time ago, I don't know. My first email address on Yahoo years ago when I first got into the interwebs, I came up with that as an email address deal because voicings, chord voice, whatever. I'm trying to be musical about it.
That's good, man. It's all good. And actually, Chris has got some gigs if you're in the Nashville area coming up in January. He's going to be playing at the 5 spot in East Nashville. He's got a standing gig there every single Wednesday in January from 6:30 to 8. And they're going to be playing all sorts of stuff, originals, covers, kind of some eclectic stuff, some Frank Zappa.
Yeah, with Jim Hoke. It's his gig, but I'm just tagging along for good measure, so.
And also he's part of a Steely Dan cover band called 12 Against Nature. You need about 12 guys to cover four guys' music and Steely Dan.
Exactly.
And they're going to be playing out in Nashville at a popular place, 3rd and Lindsley. They're playing 2 sets on January 11th. So if you're in town on January the 11th, go check out 12 Against Nature and tell Chris that you heard him on the show, and say hey. And any comments on either of those gigs or things people should know or warnings?
No, I mean, nothing. No warnings. No special dress is required.
No special dress code. No, just be yourself.
Throw money if you like it, or if you don't.
Throw money.
But no, I mean, it is what it is. They're both they're both going to be, challenging situations in their own unique ways. Obviously the Steely Dan stuff is always challenging. I played that gig. We've been doing it for almost 15 years, I guess. And I still have to have charts for some of that stuff. So yeah,
hey, Steely Dan needs charts for that stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. There's some things obviously, that, they're in my head, but it's not like a jazz gig where, like Real Book Tunes playing jazz stuff it's a lot easier to remember than some of the stuff that Steely Dan wrote those guys, Becker and Fagan, wrote some incredibly unique stuff, and it was successful, commercially successful for the most part. So it's interesting, so.
Well, come check Chris out. And again, if you're interested in Skype lessons and you're an intermediate and above player, hit him up on Instagram at CC Voicing. So just look up Chris Cottros, Cottros. Man, I can't thank you enough for your time. I'm really glad we got to connect. Thanks very much. Thanks again to Rich Eckhart for putting us together. And man, I hope you have a great holiday season, and we'll be in touch again for sure.
Same to you, bro. Yeah.
Everybody, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this interview, please share it with a friend or on your social media channels. We really appreciate your support and help with that. Thanks again to Chris Cottros for spending time with us. I really appreciate it. Come support Chris's music and come see him on the road. Don't forget, January 11th, 12 Against Nature at 3rd and Lindsley. These are in Nashville. He's got 2 sets in the 5 spot in East Nashville every Wednesday in January, 6:30 to 8:30. I feel like that was a really good commercial I just aired. I feel I need a call to action. And don't forget, tip your waiters. He'll be here all week. And make sure you go to everyonelovesguitar.com, sign up to our newsletter so you and I can connect. And most important, remember that happiness is a choice, so choose wisely. Be nice, go play your guitar, and have fun. Till next time, thanks for listening. Peace and love, and I'm out. We hope you enjoyed this show. If you did, subscribe to the Everyone Loves Guitar podcast, and you can do this online at everyonelovesguitar.com or on iTunes. And if you like the show, please leave us a 5-star positive review. The more 5-star reviews we get, the higher our show ranks, and higher rankings mean we get to continue speaking with cool, interesting guests on our show. We'll see you on the next episode, and until then, keep playing your guitar and have fun making music.